Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming. It is March, a little bit chilly, but very pretty outside. Welcome to the March Conradina Native Plant Society meeting. And Carol Hebert, I'm the current president of the Conradina chapter of the Native Plant Society. And we hope everybody is staying healthy and happy. And hopefully soon we'll all have vaccines and we'll all be back to a live, wonderfully live meeting. And we look forward to that. So we're pretty sure we're going to stay online with our meetings for a couple of months at least until the libraries open up and allow us to come in and use some meeting rooms. So be sure to always check our website at conradina.fnpschapters.org. And that way you can go back and see some of the other meetings and also just see what's going on with our calendar too. So Florida Native Plant Society always promotes the preservation, conservation, and restoration of the native plants and native plant communities of Florida. And as always, I want to introduce our wonderful officers and board members. And I'm hoping they'll be watching and chatting on the box saying, yay, go, go. So, of course, myself, Carol Hebert, I'm the president. Joe Sarmiento is our vice president. Jane Higgins is our treasurer. Catherine Mary is our secretary. And our board consists of Suzanne Valencia, Martha Stewart, Sharon Dolan, Bo Platt, Jim Baldwin, Karen Mosier, David Zeiss, Carl Weinbarger, Linda Gerasi, Leonard McCrae, Stuart Weimer, Sarah Morrison, and Cammie Donaldson. And we're lucky we have a great bunch of volunteers that keeps at it and does a lot of things all together. And we're really looking forward tonight to our speaker, Marjorie Shropshire, or Shropshire. I'll have to correct myself. And she's going to say she will be addressing how to create a native garden. And I'll introduce her shortly. Next month, be sure to pencil in. We do have April 12th at 6 o'clock is our other speaker, Carrie Mintar, and she's of UF, and she's also with the Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council, and she'll talk about how to declare an invasive plant and eradicate. So it's kind of just the opposite of what we're going to hear tonight, but it's good to be educated with that. Always, again, check our website, Conradina FNPSchapters.org. And there's also great sources of where you can buy native plants. So check it for that as well. We are starting our committee for the upcoming landscaping with Florida natives for our garden tour. It's our 12th annual. This will be our 12th annual native plant garden tour. And it's going to take place on Saturday, October 16th. And at this point, we're really not sure if it's going to be live action or if it's going to be recorded like we did last time. But we do like to hear from homeowners and who would like to have their home spread to the world about all their native plants and how well they did them. We will just give us a contact again on our website. If you go to the Conradina.fnpschapters.org, you can find myself, Carol, or Carl Weinbarger, and it's under the Contact Us button. And it's got my website, got Carl's website, and his phone number even. So if you wanted to, let us know if you're interested in having your yard shown, and or if you want to help us out, let us know. Well, let's get on with the show. I would love to introduce Marjorie Shropshire. Hi, Marjorie.
Hi, Carol.
Did I get to say your name right?
You were darn close.
Woohoo! Darn close. Well, we're so glad to have you here because you're just so educated and have all kinds of great information. Um, what I understand, the whole topic is Florida native plants and water quality and how you can make a difference by what you plant at home. Gosh, I'm all stuttery tonight. But that's a great choice. So I'm going to give you a little introduction so they know your background a little bit, and then I will turn it over to you because you were born way down in that cool area of Miami. You're going all the way down to Miami, and I'm so jealous of that. She grew up with regular trips into the Everglades, Biscayne Bay, and the Florida Keys. And her love of art led Marjorie to earn a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the University of Miami in Coral Gables, Florida. And she established her own design practice by focusing on environmental nonprofit groups. Marjorie holds Florida Master Naturalist certificates in coastal restoration, habitat evaluation, coastal systems, and upland systems. And the best part, she's been the editor of the Palmetto. The magazine is for the Florida Native Plant Society since 2005. So she has dedicated a lot of time with that. And she has a lot of other talents. So we welcome you, Marjorie.
Thanks, Carol. Thank you all for letting me attend your meeting tonight and to present this topic. And I have to throw in one more thing in my bio, just because I live in a house divided. I do have a master's degree from the University of Florida. And so wanted to throw that in there so the Gators would get, a little extra thing as well as the Canes, just in case there's some.
I'm supposed to go like this on the
Gator fans out in our audience here. Anyway, so Florida native plants and water quality is a topic of real importance, and I want to point out this photo that you're looking at, which I shot in beautiful Stuart, Florida, where I lived for over 30 years. This photo was taken about a mile from my house, which is also on this body of water. This is right off the St. Lucie River. So I don't know if anybody spent any time down in that area, but it's a really gorgeous area. The southern Indian River Lagoon there is, when you hear people talk about the most biodiverse estuary in the continental United States, it's the southern part of the Indian River Lagoon that they're talking about. Dr. Grant Gilmore did a lot of studies in the area around Gilbert's Bar, or the House of Refuge area, which is kind of close to the inlet. And that's where he found, the large number of species that kind of drive that statement. So Stuart is impacted, of course, from many, many directions. There's, just like the northern Indian River Lagoon has some water quality issues from stormwater runoff from their local watershed, and also from sewage issues, sewage spills, and septic tanks, which we've all heard a lot about, I'm sure. They also have an issue with discharge water from the Lake Okeechobee system through the C-44 canal, and that's what actually precipitated this algae bloom that you see. So what you're looking at here is a bloom of microcystis, cyanobacteria, and I have to tell you that if you've never stood next to the body of water that's been affected by this, you will be almost brought to your knees by the smell. This isn't just an issue with scenery and bad-looking water. It's also a danger to human health. Lest you think that you don't have issues with cyanobacteria in other parts of the Indian River Lagoon, there have also been cyanobacteria blooms in the northern parts of the lagoon, and some of those can be seen from space. So there was an active bloom this year that could be seen from space. So this issue is it gets worse every year, and it's really, really dire. Luckily, in the upper parts of the lagoon, you don't have the Lake Okeechobee issue that we have down south, but everywhere in the state has an issue with stormwater. Florida averages 55 to 60 inches of rain per year. Obviously, it comes in bunches. And so we used to have a pretty distinct rainy season, dry season, but that with our climate change situation, that's getting a little more erratic. The amount of rain that comes down is getting more extreme, so we're getting more extreme rain events. We've got also increased runoff due to development and the loss of wetlands. So when things are developed, the amount of concrete increases, and that's land that can no longer take up water like it used to. And when we develop over wetlands, that also takes some of the ability of the land to soak up some of this water away. And Florida does not have the best record in terms of managing growth, obviously. And most of the communities manage their stormwater by just diverting it someplace else. And so, if we've got too much stormwater, well, we're just going to shunt it off to another place where, it's not in my front yard. The other situation that happens with stormwater is when that first rain comes, that first flush, everything that's been sitting on the land for quote unquote dry season, that washes off immediately off of these hard surfaces, and it runs into swales or canals, and eventually it all ends up running into our local waterways, because that's where we dispose of stormwater. Think about that for a minute. That first flush of water is fast and dirty. So everything that is on your lawn or on your street, all of that stuff kind of goes into the water. So what is in stormwater? We kind of don't think about it. We think about it as being rain, right? But it can cause some distinct problems. And in that oval, that sort of algae green oval on the left there, damaged habitat is one of the things that happens, because it can reduce oxygen levels. And when that happens, this reduction in dissolved oxygen can precipitate fish kills. And then this whole thing can create management issues, because if you have a fish kill, the dead fish cause more nutrients in the water body, which causes more algae growth and less dissolved oxygen. And it just gets to be this sort of cyclical failure or cascading failure of the water body. And so you probably heard people talk about nutrients and, nutrients, hey, nutrients make me strong, right? Nutrients, Florida's a low nutrient state. So a lot of our natural areas don't require a lot of nutrients. And the nutrients we're talking about that are causing algae blooms are nitrogen and phosphorus. And these stimulate the growth of unwanted plants and algae, so they can cause these blooms. Another thing that is in stormwater are pollutants like herbicides, which may be affecting seagrass growth. We don't really know for sure, but I was listening to the Indian River Lagoon Symposium, and there was somebody there talking about the half-life of glyphosate and being measured at, or the observable half-life at 53 days. And so if you think about that, you can think about somebody spraying that on their yard, and supposedly that goes away, but it depends. It depends on if it's in the sunlight, if it's in the water. It depends on what happens with the temperature, with the amount of light, and as there's more and more turbidity, or the lack of clarity in waterways, some of these chemicals can actually persist longer because the sun can't get down to them to break them down as quickly as they're supposed to be broken down. These things also get introduced into the food chain. And I think I didn't put fertilizer on here, but that's another thing that, lawn fertilizers end up kind of driving some of this nutrient loading. And there's also atmospheric nitrogen coming down, because we've got an increase in atmospheric nitrogen that comes down when it rains. So these are, you probably heard the death of 1,000 cuts for the Indian River Lagoon. All these things are feeding into that. Some of them you and I don't really have a lot of control over, but we do have control over what we do at home. So another issue with stormwater is sediment runoff. So if you've heard about muck in the lagoon, a big component of muck is sediment. And, some of this is probably coming down through some of the canal systems. And what this does is it causes turbidity, poor clarity in the water. That can stick on whatever aquatic vegetation there is out there. So if there's seagrass, that sediment can stick on the seagrass, and it interferes with the ability of the seagrass to photosynthesize. Seagrass needs light, so turbidity and poor clarity actually interferes with it as well, with photosynthesis as well. It can increase the temperature because solar radiation gets trapped. And as I mentioned before, it's a big component of the muck in the Indian River Lagoon. All right, so we talked about nutrients. Well, they're fertilizer in essence. And you might have heard this before. A single pound of fertilizer can grow 500 pounds of algae in a waterway. And I had heard that before, but it sounds like, wow, 500 pounds, that's a lot of algae. But this blue stuff you're looking at here, this is also cyanobacteria it's off the St. Lucie River in Stewart, in Rio actually, which is across from Stewart. And you see those little marks in the center there, those are bird feet. So this stuff is thick enough for wading birds to walk on. In places, it was probably 4 or 5 inches thick. And so this is pretty shocking. And that lower picture was the Banana River fish kill, which some of you may remember. Those are redfish on the beach. That was really, I thought that was the saddest day of my life, really, when I saw that fish kill. And then when I saw the algae bloom, I couldn't decide which one of those things was worse. All right, so now we've had all the doom and gloom. What can we do about this? Well, another thing that enters into this is living shorelines, which is the state our shorelines used to be in before we started doing things like building seawalls. And so right now, about 14% of the shoreline is already hardened, and half of what's left is under threat of being hardened. And that's because of a couple of reasons. Increase in population. People like to live along the water, and they think that seawalls are the only way to go. And also the effects of sea level rise, sunny day flooding. There's actually talk about raising seawall heights in Broward County by 3 feet. And so this is really, really dire. Living shorelines also support 80 to 90% of our commercially important marine species. So if you like to fish, and you're sitting there with a seawall that has not been remediated, then your seawall is part of that problem. The other thing you can do if you do have a seawall is if you plant, from your seawall up towards into your yard. This last bullet point is talking about a marsh and how much marsh can remove nutrient runoff. That they're talking about plants in the water. But if you can't put plants in the water near your seawall, you could build a 10-foot or wider margin of native plants from your seawall back to the yard and isolate your landscape from the waterway. And that can also keep some of those nutrients and soils from escaping over your seawall and into the water body.
One question real quick, Marjorie. The hardening of the soil, is that because it's out of the water too often?
Now, this is not, when I'm talking about hardening, I'm not talking about hardening soil. I'm talking about hardening the shoreline itself. And so largely what we're talking about is seawalls, building seawalls. So Florida's coasts used to be mostly covered with either salt marsh or mangroves. And, people like to have a view. So they take these things down. They also think that they don't protect them. And so typically developers will take these down and they'll build a hard seawall, a concrete seawall. And there's no plants next to that. A seawall can actually increase erosion because it diverts the wave energy from where plants would let the wave energy come up like it's showing in this graphic here. So the water would go up into these trees and back and forth. The sediment would get trapped in there, and there would be this, sediment and larvae and phytoplankton could come in, and then things would go back and forth, but the vegetation there would catch a lot of that sediment and not let it go back. So it didn't erode away. Once you destroy all that and you build a vertical hard surface that's perpendicular to the bottom, the wave energy gets transferred down the face of that, and it scours out the base of the seawall and actually undermines the sediment at the base of your seawall, and eventually it can fall in. Mm. So when we're talking about hardening, we're talking about building hard structures, replacing the living material that was there originally. Wow, and the term living shorelines, actually, I want to just talk about that for a second, because living shorelines, that term really is not used for natural communities. That's a term that we're using for things that we are constructing with plants to replace or augment areas that have been disturbed.
Thank you. That really clarifies it. And wow, what a difference if people don't build things and just plant or gently make a range of the area.
Yeah, and then there's a lot of, I've got a whole presentation on living shorelines as well, but if you do have a seawall, say you live in a community that is a canal community with seawalls, and I'm not going to get too far into this because we could really go, into the weeds with it, but there are things you can do with riprap and mangroves to remediate seawalls that help increase the amount of habitat, and that addition actually will help stabilize the seawall and extend its life a little bit. And so, if we could only get people to be willing to plant some mangroves in these spaces, that would help a lot with our water quality. All right, any more questions on that before I move on?
There is one question Julie put up. She was asking, does the FDP control the requests for seawalls?
Okay, the permitting, that's a whole bag of worms. And so you are required to get permits. And the problem with talking about permitting is that it's really, in many cases, site specific. But yes, if you're interested in building a seawall, you will have to get permits. One of the things I'm working on right now, and I'm working on it with Dr. Vincent Encomio, who is the IFAS Sea Grant agent for Martin and St. Lucie counties. Vincent and I are working on a homeowner-based website that will answer all these questions and show people what they need to do and what this process is in a step-by-step way, because there is a process. If anybody listening to this presentation wants to know more about what they can do, I would recommend calling your whoever the local expert in your area is. In Martin and St. Lucie County's case, it would be Vincent at Sea Grant IFAS. You also might have somebody at your county that, and I don't know the names of those folks, but there's a group called the East Coast ESRT, the East Coast Esrin Restoration Team. And I think some of those folks probably would be the people you would call. You can also call the county and ask them if they have somebody that's working with living shorelines and get started that way. Typically, the permitting is not really something the homeowner does. So, you'd be working with somebody that would help with the permitting piece of that.
Thank you, Marjorie. We did have Martha email in about identified the person, Holly Abeels. So that would I'm putting it up as information for people here in Brevard if they wanted more information on that.
Oh, that's really great. Thanks, Martha. Okay, I'm going to move on. All right, so some of the plants that we see on living shorelines in our area are salt marsh cordgrass, Spartina alterniflora. And so these two pictures, the picture on the left is a site on the St. Lucie River, that's Pendarvis Cove. And they're getting ready to plant those nursery grown Spartina plants. And then on the right, you'll see an image of a really successful living shoreline project that's been put in at the Driftwood Motel in Jensen Beach. And this is along the western shore of the Indian River Lagoon. It is just to the north of the Jensen Beach Causeway. And you'll notice in the background that the adjoining property has doesn't have as much shoreline. I mean, they have linear shoreline, but their shoreline is not as wide as what you're seeing here in front of the Driftwood. And so what was done in this case is, this was a project that Vincent worked on, and they built an oyster reef here. So you see out in the water there are, where that post is, and then in the foreground you see a little white piece of PVC. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there's a little white piece of PVC, and there are oyster reefs out here. And so that was the first step in constructing this living shoreline, to build these oyster reefs offshore, and that helps break up the wave energy we talked about that is eroding this shoreline in the background here. And then once that oyster reef has been put in and it protects this area a little bit, then you can start planting your Spartina grass, which grows in the intertidal zone. There are other plants that can be added past this on the landward side. In this case, the landowner, because this is a motel, and they need their view, they could not put a mangrove fringe all the way across this entire area. And so there are some mangrove trees, they're out of this picture. But ideally, you would have mangroves behind this. But what's really important about this is you can see that this, once this was installed, it started to actually accrue some sand behind here. And so this has been in a number of years, and it's been really, really successful. And the oyster recruitment on the site has been really successful as well. And so this reef is self-sustaining as long as new oyster spat are coming along and settling on this and attaching to it and growing. And so once you build this, then you get all the birds that want to come here and, and forage, and you get reduction in the amount of sediment that's floating around. And it's really a complete win-win. And, think about this one little piece of this. If we get everybody along the Indian River from Jensen Beach all the way up to Fort Pierce and then even beyond to do this on these places where really what they've got, like here in the background, is some turf grass, and then they've got some riprap, and there's no habitat there. So another really important native plant for living shoreline is red mangrove, which everybody's seen. This is a keystone species, amazingly important. I mean, I could do a whole presentation on all the things that mangroves do, but basically this is one of the plants that drives the entire system in the Indian River Lagoon. Even the food web is driven by this plant. So the leaves fall off in the water, and it just provides all kinds of habitat, places to feed, places to hide, and places to reproduce. Not only the roots, but in the canopy, and the amount of food that this generates, like I said, from the leaves falling and breaking down and being converted into energy by all the little animals that are down there. So taking these mangroves away has caused a lot of problems for our water quality. So what if you don't live, if you're not lucky enough to live on the Indian River Lagoon or on the St. Lucie River or on, one of these estuaries that we are so lucky to be able to experience? A lot of people live on retention ponds, have these retention ponds in their neighborhood. And I saw a figure when I was working on another presentation that there are more than 76,000 retention ponds in Florida. So almost 80,000 of these things, constructed retention ponds. These are what largely replaced our wetland systems. And if you think about a natural wetland system with all the plants that are in it, and all the the pieces of it as an ecosystem that work together, this is not really a replacement in any way, shape, or form. These things basically are designed to hold water and to, in some cases, I mean, I think in most cases, they were designed to keep dirty water out of natural water bodies. But some studies are being done on these, and they're finding out that they hold water and they let the water percolate, but they might also end up being what are called nutrient sinks. So you see in the case here where all this grass goes right down to the edge of this thing, and you know that that grass is being maintained, and things are running off into this, and these ponds can interchange their water with groundwater, and so nothing really stays where you put it, unfortunately, if it's in the water. A lot of them don't have edge vegetation, as you see here, and we really need these wetland areas and native plants on the margins to help filter and clean this water. And so it's important with these retention ponds to try to do something with them and not just have the grass going right down to the edge. The habitat of this could be improved by adding native plants. There's a guy up at UF, Dr. Basil Iannone, and he's doing some work on, you could probably Google him, but he's doing some work on retention ponds and how they're interacting with native plants. That's pretty interesting. So what can you do about these things? This is an aerial photo, and please don't look at this link. I just checked this link tonight and it no longer works. So that doesn't go where you want to go to look at this information about this pond. But the man in the waders on the lower right is a fellow named Ernie Frank. And this is the Osprey Stormwater Retention Pond, which is in his condominium association over in St. Pete. And Ernie was upset about what was going on with water quality in this pond. And you can see they had the same issue where the grass kind of just goes right down to the edge. And so he worked really hard to try to add a bunch of native plants to this thing and to make it better for his community. And he's online, so if you Google Ernie Frank Stormwater Pond, you'll find some articles about him and what he did over there. But I wanted to show this because it shows a number of native plants that were added to this pond. Yellow canna, I don't have the Latin names on this page, but we do have them further on. Alligator flag, iris pickerel weed, duck potato, and he does have some water lilies in here as well. And so looking at that same kind of pond vegetation from a side view, one of the things that's really important to think about if you're planting pond vegetation is what these transition zones are and what the height of the water is, because some things like to be deeper than other things. So obviously if you're adding something like sand cordgrass, which will also grow in freshwater, or horsetail, those are things that are growing more shallowly, so they'd be up, further up. Southern blue iris a little further down, and then where there's a little shelf, you can maybe add some duck potato, and then alligator flag is a bigger plant, so that can go further out. And then pickerel weed, and then of course water lilies are gonna float up onto the surface, and so they're out in and spatterdock, they're out in that deeper zone, 3 to 5 feet deep. So you can have things on the edge of the pond itself. You can have things out in the water floating. Some people also build floating islands. There's a floating island project right now. It's called a BMAP, and it's up at UF near the architecture building where they've got a sinkhole that had terrible water quality, and they're just trying that out as an experiment. Excuse me. All right, so native plants help keep water clean. We talked about that. Shoreline plants act as a buffer and help reduce stormwater runoff, and thereby improving the health of the water body. Native tree canopies also improve stormwater, and I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. And as we all know, native plants don't need chemical applications to keep them happy. So since we don't need to apply chemicals, those chemicals don't run off into a water body. So this is a really pretty picture here. It's somebody's backyard. I'm going to confess, it's my backyard in Sebastian. And this is when I first purchased the property, and the previous owner was very into lawn. And I was really lucky because this property has a very nice oak tree canopy. It's got 9 oak trees, and then it had this jacaranda, which I cut down. And it's got, I'm telling you what's wrong, right? So this says what's wrong with this picture. But what's wrong with this picture is that anything that, if I were to have a spray guy say, and I don't, the previous owner did, but all of that stuff would end up going right into this water body. And so one of the things I've been working on is to fix this. Here's another one. Home landscapes can affect water quality, and even non-waterfront homes can cause water pollution. So I hear people talk about the Indian River Lagoon, and they talk about, the St. Lucie River down in Stewart, and they say things like, I don't live on the water, so I'm not causing a problem. Well, I'm going to beg to differ on that because of what we talked about earlier with stormwater and how stormwater is treated. So if stormwater is going into a retention pond and exchanging groundwater with a natural water body, yes, that's an issue. If your water off your house is running into a swale out in front of your yard and then running into a bigger swale that runs into a canal, those canals all lead directly to the lagoon. And so you don't have to live on the water to be part of the problem. And you don't have to live on the water to be part of the solution either. So, we're going to look at this picture again. What's wrong with this picture? There's a lot of turf grass here, and it was chemically maintained. And what can we do about that? So this is a picture of a lawn up in Northeast Florida. It's up near Jacksonville. And you may have seen this picture before because my cohort has included this in her presentation, Jenny Steibolt. The idea here is to reduce lawns and convert the remaining lawn areas to a freedom lawn. And by freedom lawns, we just mean something that you don't apply chemicals to and you don't over irrigate. And once you start doing that, instead of having a monoculture of turf grass, you'll get a lot of different plants that will attract pollinators, and it'll still look green. So this example is a lawn that has been a freedom lawn for more than 10 years. It looks perfectly fine. I've actually seen this lawn, and it looks as good as anything in the neighborhood, even though no spray is applied, and there's no weed in feed, there's no fertilizer, and no over irrigation on this particular lawn. And anybody can do this. So another thing with freedom lawns is, I mentioned they have a lot of different plants. Some of the things that will pop up maybe are Canadian toadflax, some rain lilies might show up, some St. John's wort, and there's a lot of little things that we think of as weeds that are actually butterfly attracting plants that might show up in your lawn. And the bonus to this is it's water friendly and kid and pet safe, so you don't have to worry about letting the kids run out there in bare feet and letting your dog run out and roll around on this, because it doesn't need any pesticides or herbicides or weed killers or fertilizer. So I mentioned the tree canopy, and there is a tie-in between the tree canopy and our water issues. And if you look at that bottom bullet point, 100 mature trees catch about 139,000 gallons of water a year. And think about what's happened to Florida. I know I'm 62 years old, and like Carol was saying, born in Miami, and I have seen a lot of trees go down over the years, all over the state. Typically, even down in Miami, where we had maritime hammock with big oaks and things like that, a lot of that went down, and what we ended up with was the typical Florida yard, which has a couple of palm trees, often not native, and a lot of turf grass, and then some ornamental stuff. And so the rainwater that came down in those areas, those big oaks that were there before that would have taken up and respirated that water are gone. And so that lack of a tree canopy is adding to our issues with stormwater. So if you can plant a tree canopy in your yard, underplant that with understory trees and shrubs. And so, think about planting in your yard the way nature plants. And so nature doesn't have trees kind of standing out by themselves, because if trees are standing out by themselves, they're more vulnerable to wind and all kinds of, the forces of nature, where if they're in groups, they've got a little bit more support from one another. And this understory idea, so this is called vertical layering. And because a lot of us don't have a whole lot of property, by vertical layering, you can have a lot more different kinds of plants in your landscape because you're taking advantage of the height. So you can have a canopy tree, an understory tree, some shrubs, and then you can underplant that with all of the fun little herbaceous stuff that we really love to play around with. If you're planting trees, replant them with trees native to your region, regionally appropriate trees. So we talked about these canopy trees reducing stormwater, and this is how it works. Rain hits the canopy and it actually gets distributed. So the leaves break the raindrops up a little bit, and it slows the flow down. You wouldn't think that leaves would make that big a difference, but they do. So the water gets distributed. There's less soil disruption because the leaves help break that rainwater up. And the water movement itself is slowed on the ground so it can get absorbed. And if you have one large tree, it can manage an inch of water that falls on about a half acre. So if you think about my yard, which is about a little over a half acre, I have 9 large live oaks, and I've got 7 cabbage palms, and I've got 2 about 40-foot laurel cherries, and then a bunch of other stuff I won't name. But my stormwater situation is helped a lot by having that tree canopy. And that graphic to the left shows essentially what's happening. So you have precipitation, you have throughfall, which is the rain that makes it through the leaves, this pervious surface where the water soaks into the ground and infiltrates the soil. The roots take some of that up, and then evapotranspiration returns that, and the tree transpires and returns some of that up to the atmosphere, and then that cycle starts over again. And so by cutting out the amount of runoff, we get cleaner water just by planting canopy trees. Another thing that you can do at home is to build a rain garden. And this drawing is an example of taking a downspout and making a little pool. And you don't want to do this right up next to your house, but you can dig out an area a little bit away from your house. You can route your downspouts into this. You can even route a downspout to rain barrels and then run the overflow into a rain garden. That's another way to handle it. There's a lot of different ways to handle these little rain gardens. But if you do this, you dig out a little depression and you can line it with a little bit of a pond liner, and then you can grow some plants in there that you might not have been able to grow before. So for example, button bush, you could grow some water-loving wildflowers. You can have some things like string lilies in there, some ferns. And one thing about rain gardens, if you plant plants that can cope with our wet seasons and our dry seasons, you can have something in there all year long. And the whole point of the rain garden is to hold this water and then release it slowly so that the plants can filter it and it can get absorbed into the ground. And one of the figures I found about how these work says that, and this was in the Pacific Northwest, we don't really have a lot of problems in Florida with heavy metal pollution, except for mercury, which is a byproduct of, I think, the coal-fired power plants. But in the Pacific Northwest, these rain gardens can filter 40% of these heavy metal pollutants out, and they figure about 15% of the nitrogen can be captured by these things and removed. And so this helps return water to the aquifer. So if you don't know how the aquifer works down here, in North Florida, you're drinking water from the Floridan aquifer, which is deep. And that's ancient water that's really clean. But in South Florida, we're essentially drinking from the superficial aquifer. And so, you're talking not 1,000 feet deep or whatever, you're talking, 80 feet deep, 70 feet deep. So think about everything that you allow to go into a water body from your home. Basically, that's going into our water supply. Rain gardens actually also can provide a little bit of food and shelter to pollinators and small wildlife. And if you, depending on the size of your rain garden, that could have a big effect. So here's a side view of how this works. And it's, I have a pond in my place. And I'm actually thinking about building another one of these things that's a lot bigger. But so this says rain gardens can be any size, but if they're less than 100 square feet, you don't get a lot of very much of a diversity of native plants. And if you don't make them deeper than 4 to 8 inches, then you don't have water standing for a long time in there. So it'll actually percolate down and be dry part of the time. And that way, if you're concerned with mosquitoes, although I have fish in my pond, so I don't have a mosquito issue in my pond. And some rain.
Marjorie, what
Yeah.
would be the main depth that you're talking about? Did I miss that? The depth of
Yeah. So, I think it depends on the kind of pond that you're actually going to build. So in this graphic, it says depth varies right there because the water level goes up and down depending on how much water is in there. And I think that would end up being kind of dependent on the size, the physical size of the pond and the volume of water that you're trying to capture. But all this is saying is that if you figure on it being 4 to 8 inches, then that's going to capture the water coming off your house, but it won't be standing water there for a long time unless that's what you want.
Oh,
so
okay.
if you have a lined pond, if you put a pond liner in, so Craig Hugel, I think, has on his blog, he has something about how he did this in his yard. And I believe he actually put a little pond liner in there because he wanted his rain garden to stay wet all the time. Other people don't necessarily put a liner in there. And so it's more of a thing that captures the water for a short period of time and then it disappears. So, there's a bunch of different ways to do this.
Interesting. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And some rain garden plants here. There are a bunch of these, but I found this on the SarasotaBay.org has a lot of really good information on doing this. The West Coast, Tampa Bay and Sarasota have done a lot of work. They're 20 years ahead of us in terms of cleaning up their water. And so if those of us along the Indian River Lagoon can look to Tampa Bay as where we wish we were at right now, because they've done a lot. And, their population is much higher than ours. And so we really should be able to do something for the lagoon. They have better water flow than we do, though, in the middle and northern lagoon, and that enters into it also. So some rain garden plants you can see here. These are sort of divided up into aquatics, things that will grow right in the water. Some grasses that you can put adjoining your rain garden, and some ground covers. Blue-eyed grass is blooming right now. It's really beautiful. The rabbits ate all of mine, unfortunately. Tick seed is something that likes a little bit of moisture. And then obviously swamp hibiscus, which we all just love. And that's a plant that I have recently added to that canal bank that you saw, along with wax myrtle, horsetail, giant leather fern, cypress trees, I added swamp hibiscus and another native hibiscus to that. And that's a real work in progress out there. trying to make that be a more natural bank and not just have grass going right down to the water. And this list on the right includes some trees. So Dahoon holly is a tree that really likes wet feet. Gallberry, sweet bay, and I mentioned buttonbush and wax myrtle. But these are all really beautiful plants that will give your yard a lot of beauty, and also its habitat, and it provides food for, like, berries and blooms, pollinators, and birds will use a lot of these plants. Even if they don't have a place to live in your yard, they can pass through and get something to eat. So how to get started with natives? Well, we know we want to join FNPS, and you can get a list of recommended native plants for your county by going to that part of the website that has plants, and you can search for specific plants and also for your area. And then if you go to plantrealflorida.org, that's the FAN website, where you can find all the information about where to find plants and where the native nurseries and people that work with native plants are in your area. And so I believe that is all that I have for tonight. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Awesome, awesome. I think it was very just great influence to us, where we would even see that first picture you had. It was closer to the beginning with the footprints of the birds, and it was in the hardened, fertilized soil. That was like almost a shocking picture. It really stood out to me, and I'm sure to others, and just went, wow, that's what that is. And then of course the dead fish. So
yeah, Carol, let me tell you about that though, because what that is, that blue-green stuff is blue-green algae that is floating 5 inches thick on the surface of the water.
wow.
And so below this is part of the St. Lucie River. This is not shallow water. It is not, on the shoreline. This is floating like big pieces of foam on the water, and the birds are walking on it.
Mm.
So this is where, the northern lagoon's not there yet, but this is scary. And I never thought I would see anything like this ever in my life.
Well, we totally agree. And at the end too, the wonderful presentation of which plants to use, a way to set up that little garden if you're close to water, or if you just have the stormwater, that runs from your roof into the big tub that holds the water. Oh, that's such a great way to just capture it anywhere within your own landscape.
Yeah, really, that's the key to it. I think for every homeowner, you hear people say there's no such thing as a way, and that's absolutely the truth. That, we can let our stormwater run off someplace else, but then it comes back and we drink it. And so the best thing you can do is to hold as much of it as you can on your own property. And one way to do that is to do all the things we talked about in here with native plants.
Right. That was great. And just wanted to ask also, there was one question earlier that Julia had about, are there any laws about starting, let me go back and make sure I got it right. She was asking about if FDEP denied permission based on the amount of hardening seashores. Was that, is that?
Not sure I understand the question.
It was about controlling the request for seawalls. That if FDEP controls the request for seawalls, are they the ones that people would maybe go to get a permit?
Yeah, so there's a couple of, well, this is probably changing. This is the problem because it changes all the time. But the entities that are involved with the permitting process are FDEP and in some cases the Army Corps of Engineers. And so a lot of this depends on, there's a lot of factors. So for example, depending on where you are in the lagoon, there's some areas that will have different requirements for permitting. There are some areas where, like, so for example, I don't have the picture in here, but I have a picture of a site in Indian River County where it's a really high energy site. It's on the west side of the lagoon. And it's also in an area that, I can't remember what it's called, but there's a limit on how far out into the water that you can do something in that area. And so unfortunately, those folks probably can't do anything except have their seawall there. You know, they might be able to add some riprap off of it because, you know, you're only going out, you know, I don't know, 18 inches or something. And then incorporate some mangrove plantings into that. I mean, that might be possible for them. But even that, I just kind of don't know how to answer that because it's so non-specific. It's kind of a non-specific question. But yeah, FDEP and the Army Corps are the entities that handle the permitting. And it used to be that permitting went first to FDEP and then they would communicate with the Army Corps. But I don't know what's going on right now. There are also some expedited permitting structures for people that have, you know, a smaller number of linear feet of a shoreline. So I think if you're under, I don't want to get quoted on the numbers because I'd have to look all this up. But if you're under a certain number of feet of shoreline, then you might be able to have an expedited permit. Then permitting is not my forte, so I'm really asking me permitting questions is probably not, you're probably not going to get the answer you need because I probably don't know it.
Yeah. And who knows, it covers what, 5 counties, our lagoon. And so I don't know if there's little differences as you go north or as you go south. So,
well,
yeah.
you know, the thing that's why if you're interested in that kind of stuff, contact a local expert because those people like Vincent and Jim Oppenborn and those folks work with FDEP and they're the boots on the ground and they know what's going on and they could answer the question in terms of a specific area that you're interested in versus, you know, like I think, and there's also a website. I mean, if you can Google FDEP living shoreline permitting or whatever and get a lot of information. There's actually some really good information that was put together by IFAS up in Cedar Key about, it's about permitting for homeowners. There's a couple of fact sheets.
Oh.
And that might be a useful place to start, to Google, you know, IFAS living shoreline homeowner permits or something like that. And these fact sheets basically have a little bit about the process. But that's the place where everybody, I did a bunch of interviews when I was, you know, Vincent and I have been working on this website project, and I did a bunch of interviews with people about the topic, trying to figure out, you know, what are their hot buttons, what's keeping people from doing more with living shorelines. And one of the things that comes up over and over and over is this confusion about the permitting process. You know, the fact that it's regulatory and, you know, face facts. If Florida had better regulations, you wouldn't be looking at what we're looking at in this picture.
Yeah.
So we need to have a regulatory environment if we want to have a clean environment in the state. And so I think that like permitting is part of the process, but it isn't something to be afraid of. It's something that, you know, needs to be worked with. And it can take a while. And, you know, people get frustrated with that sometimes, but it's, there's a reason that it's there. And, it's not, I guess long story short, I don't believe that the permitting part of it is a reason to like not do it. Because it's really no different than if you're going to build a house, you have to get a permit, right?
Yeah, right. It,
So,
it could even be through the education, and I think Marine Resources Council does a lot of that and tries to just educate the person. And they go, oh, I might like to have some plants on this side, and I could still see out my window, and that they have a good reason for why to put the plants in. So,
yeah, the other thing that comes up is mangroves, because people get concerned about mangrove trimming. And that's another thing where there's a lot of misinformation, and homeowners get very concerned about that. But, all of this can be worked with. And just like anything else, we kind of have to decide what we want. So, I hear people talk about, well, my view is really important to me. And I was a waterfront homeowner. And so I lived on that river you're looking at out there up until 2017. And when I moved up to Sebastian, but the choice is really like you can have the view, but if the view is causing this horrific water quality issue, or is part of that problem, or if your septic tank is part of that problem, or if your water runoff is part of that problem, then we have to be part of the solution of that as individuals. And, it's partly doing stuff at home, but it's also partly agitating for better regulatory processes and, with like things like septic tank, like rules that govern fixing your septic tank. All right. I mean, that's just something we're going to have to do unless we just want to live with stinky water all the time.
yeah, yeah.
And now there's this thing, I haven't really delved into this very much, but this issue with the manatees right now, which is really distressing. And, that's getting blamed on the lack of seagrass in the lagoon. And I'm not entirely sure what's going on, so I can't really comment on that. But I think what we're looking at is a really, we're at a big tipping point right now in Florida, and we desperately need as individuals to do what we can at home and also to get out there and talk to other people and talk to people in government about what we want for, our future as Floridians.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're hands down agree with that. One thing, Marjorie, we of course live in a different county, and our county did approve a nice amount of money towards redoing a lot of the areas that flow into the lagoon. And so a lot of that work has been done. So that's through the Natural Resources Department, and MRC helps out. And there's a lot of great, because we all voted yes, use our money and help get the lagoon going. So that's a big positive.
Yeah, Martin County. So like this neighborhood you're looking at right here, that entire neighborhood went on septic. So, off septic and went onto a sewer system.
Great.
And so, great. That's not going to stop the Lake Okeechobee mess, but it certainly will cut down on the load of nutrient that's going into that waterway,
right.
from that particular neighborhood.
Fantastic. Well, you really opened our eyes, and we love to hear it, and the very cool pictures, and kind of motivated me a little to get my rain barrel, kind of dig a little place out, and that's why I was asking for the depth. But I know another person that Suzanne's house is wonderful. She has hers that way. But you were great. We really appreciate your time and giving us all this influence. We did have a lot of people really enjoying it, really informative and interesting. Thanks for a very informative presentation. Great pictures along the lagoon. So it had a lot of nice feedback. I wanted to make sure you heard. So I think we're all set for our meeting. So I thank everybody for who came tonight and enjoyed this. Just keep posted, and we're going to have our next meeting April the 12th. And thank you so much, Marjorie.
Oh, thanks for letting me come and talk to you all tonight. I'm really grateful that you were willing to sit through the presentation and listen to some ideas about what we can do.
Absolutely. And we are all along the love of this Indian River Lagoon. So thank you so much. And everyone in the audience, plant native. Thank you.